You're listening to Making the Cut, the mostly true life story of a retired surgeon from 1C Productions.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Seitz, founder and president of 1C Productions. This episode contains explicit language and adult content. It is intended for mature audiences only.
I had been too busy to give thought towards how my broken relationship with mother might play out in my love with Victoria. It did not occur to me then that we cannot escape a reckoning with the wounds of our childhood. Ironically, my reckoning began as I worked in the place of birth, the obstetrical ward. It was June 1967 as I began my obstetrical rotation.
I caught up with my first assigned patient, Mrs. Coleman, on her way from the maternity ward to the labor room. Professor Brandt, who looked unusually young for his position, settled her into the reclining labor chair, feet apart with knees partially in the air and covered with a sheet. The attending midwife held her hand and offered her sips of iced water despite the slow IV drip in her left arm. Mrs. Coleman was a 34-year-old American executive from New York who already had a 4-year-old son delivered by C-section at an East Coast U.S. hospital. Recently, she and her family had transferred to London. Professor Brandt, lean and indefatigable, with a BTA to Yale, took a particular interest in Mrs. Coleman's delivery. He had determined that her dream of a vaginal birth was attainable. Back home, Mrs. Coleman explained, a vaginal delivery after a C-section was contraindicated. The presence of the previous uterine scar was perhaps the weakest point of a contracting organ. The scar could not stretch and dilate in concordance with the rest of the uterus. It might rupture, endangering fetus and mother and leading to an emergency salvage operation. Once a cesarean, always a cesarean, was the rule in the United States. Professor Brandt, who drew many plaudits from his patients, stood next to Mrs. Coleman in his long white coat.
There are several case reports in the obstetric literature of successful vaginal deliveries following an LSCS.
LSCS?
Lower segment caesarean section.
That's the horizontal incision placed between the top of the cervix and the uterus to extract the baby and the placenta.
The midwife nodded. It was now obvious to all that on my first day of this new rotation, I knew nothing about obstetrics.
We're going to proceed with each stage of Mrs. Coleman's labor with great care, aiming for a natural vaginal birth, although we are ready to operate at a moment's notice to ensure safe delivery. I want you to follow her progress and report any unexpected changes directly to me.
Oh. Ow. Ah. Is there something for the pain? Oh.
Mrs. Coleman's cervix dilated rapidly to 3 or 4 fingers. Between them she complained of backache and rolled onto her side so that I could massage the point of greatest discomfort. I felt helpless, merely timing the contractions, rubbing her back and trying not to be in the midwife's way. Knowing I was a novice, Mrs. Coleman ignored me, apart from gripping my arm forcefully with each contraction. Her eyes lit up when she saw that her repeated entreaties stoked my anxiety. I was unaccustomed to patients in overt pain during my surgical rotations. She could see my sympathy and perhaps thought I was more likely to be her advocate, despite my novice status.
How many deliveries have you done?
This will be my first.
Nurse Emma, stay with me.
She was right. The midwife gloved and stepped forward, spread Mrs. Coleman's knees with her elbows, and inserted her goopy, jelly-covered hand into Mrs. Coleman's vagina under the white sheet.
Ah.
Good news, you're coming along nicely. Mr. McGead here will continue to time your contractions and report to me. Your bladder is full and we'll drain it. Take some deep breaths and close your eyes for a while.
Nurse Emma soon returned with a large kidney dish, a blob of lube, a sterile catheter, and a box of latex gloves.
Glove up and drain her bladder.
Have you done this before?
He's done surgery. He's a very skilled student. You're lucky he's on today.
On seeing me sit before her knees, Mrs. Coleman reflexively snapped them together, placed her hand over the sheet, covering her crotch and thighs.
Oh! Oh!
Pant, don't push.
I pried Mrs. Coleman's knees apart. She insisted on keeping the sheet, which covered her thighs and hung over her knees. I crawled under it like an old-time photographer, edging my way forward in the tight space and pale light. I could hardly breathe. Her pale inner thighs resembled cold wax or the vertical white walls of the narrow Corinth Canal as I moved toward my goal. Then I stopped, confronted by a horrific, unexpected sight. Her labia were shaven, swollen, and marble-like. Not a hair remained, only the semblance of black stubbles and a stark, naked ugliness. Was this the thing that James Laughlin described as the altar of love? The sacred place, the locus of the sacrament, where the ritual of the mysteries is enacted? It looked obscene, irreverent, vulgar, and not one bit sexy. Mrs. Coleman's image was even more shocking than the line diagrams a friend and I had giggled over in his library when curiosity made us seek views of the female anatomy. I do not remember my women friends looking like this either, even though I had not made it the point of study when I saw it. The stifling enclosure made me lightheaded.
How are you doing down there?
All right. With eyes closed, I advanced the catheter between Mrs. Coleman's labia. I came up for air.
How much urine came out?
Nothing.
Let me see. Mrs. Coleman, try to relax and drop your knees further apart for me. Let's pull this sheet up a tad so we can see what's going on here.
Mrs. Coleman closed her eyes, turned her head away from us, clutched the bed railing, and obliged. The midwife sat on the stool between Mrs. Coleman's thighs and exposed the labia. I had inserted the catheter into the vagina. She looked up at me, slowly raising her left eyebrow for a few seconds.
Get me a fresh catheter.
What's going on down there?
Nothing much. You're doing fine. I'm familiarizing Mr. McGee with the anatomy. Don't worry. Let me know when a contraction is coming.
This is all very embarrassing.
Keep taking deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your mouth, each time relaxing more. Now, Mr. McGee, this is her clitoris, below that her urethral opening into which the catheter should go, and as you can see, below that the gaping vagina. Somewhere up there is Mrs. Coleman's lovely baby, about to come out.
I felt pale.
Is it coming?
Very soon. Remember to pant when you get a contraction.
The midwife slickly inserted the catheter into the bladder, and golden urine flowed immediately into the large kidney dish.
Are you feeling better?
I nodded.
Not you, you clod. Mrs. Coleman, are you feeling better?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Coleman, close your eyes and try to rest. You'll need your energy. Your contractions will start again. I'm going to check on my other patients. Mr. McGee will be staying with you.
I moved up to the railing. Mrs. Coleman? She opened her eyes. Would you like some more water? Shall I refresh your face cloth?
Okay.
The midwife returned with an IV bottle labeled oxytocin.
I'm going to piggyback this solution onto your regular drip.
What is it? Oh no, it's not oxy, is it? Have I stalled?
Yes, but this will stimulate your contractions and help you along.
Does Brant know? I mean, am I failing at this attempt? Is it necessary? Perhaps I should have a section after all. I want to talk to him.
It's quite natural to help a patient along. I spoke to Mr. Brandt and he ordered this to strengthen your contractions. He's about to lecture the students, then he'll come and see you.
She turned to me.
Perhaps you should attend his talk. I'll take care of her.
I hesitated.
Go on, I'll see you later. We have a long day ahead of us.
Professor Brandt's midday lecture in the auditorium was on abortion. I was glad I was there because we were only a handful of students. I had never given the subject much thought, since I planned to become a surgeon. He was an eloquent speaker, dropping a hint that he had returned from a sabbatical in America. He informed us that abortions in the United States were illegal, unlike in the United Kingdom.
Here, terminations are allowed during the first trimester, pending the affidavit from the patient's physician and a psychiatrist.
I took copious notes on the number of deaths from back-alley abortions in countries that prohibited the procedure. The passion with which he delivered the case for legal abortion was extraordinary. A zealot on the issue. He argued it was a woman's right to control her body, and by the time she had made the painful decision to have an abortion, in his experience, she had gone through hell. Lastly, he emphasized that the patient was exercising her right, and that a cluster of cells should not be confused with a living human. The male side of the situation was not covered. I wondered, what if the male partner or husband was emotionally involved? Did he always agree with the decision to abort? Were there post-abortion emotional consequences for the couple, for the woman, and even for the man? The more I thought about the topic, the more I realized the complexity of the issue. The forcefulness of his message impressed me, while the lack of counter-arguments gave me pause. He was a man of personal force and intellectual aspiration. My wonderings ended when Professor Brandt proceeded to describe the traditional method of D&C. Is this the procedure my mother would have undergone had she gone through with aborting me?
D&C is the acronym for dilation and curettage. This is the procedure of slowly dilating the cervix and carefully scraping up the lining of the uterus and its contents. As a therapeutic gynecological procedure, it's used most often during the first trimester miscarriage or abortion. It bears potential complications, including uterine perforation.
Despite the enlightening lecture, as a surgeon I would not have use for the information and thought of it as more of a break from my apprehensive patient back in the labor room. And I certainly had neither room in my mind nor inclination in my heart to ponder Mother's attitude toward carrying and having me anymore. Another delivery awaited, one of 25 babies I needed to deliver in order to pass the obstetric course. I returned to the ward and found that Mrs. Coleman had stalled anew in her progress. She looked exhausted after 7 hours into her labor. She once again begged for the pain medication, which was not dispensed, since an opioid slowed the fetus's breathing and masked potential uterine rupture. While I was joining Professor Brandt and the midwife at Mrs. Coleman's bedside, about discussing the probability of a C-section, the registrar came up behind me.
Get on and see the new patient. This one is going to have a section over in the private wing and I'm assisting. Next time, don't disappear without my permission. You were on call and we have patients to take care of. Understand?
He strutted off like a peacock in his Wellington boots. I did not know his name, but he was an insensitive, arrogant bastard. Mary, my new patient, was 18 years old and well along in her labor. A new midwife followed in my wake. The midwife showed me how to do a thorough vaginal exam to assess Mary's progress. Mary had dilated well. I could feel the fetus's crown. There had been no time to shave her or give her the traditional enema. She merely lay on her back, in her street clothes, looking away from me as I took a history between contractions. Where are you from?
Belfast.
Did you know you were pregnant?
Yes.
Did you have any prenatal care?
No. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't talk to anyone. I was frightened. When my membranes broke, I took the ferry across the Mersey and the train from Liverpool to London. My contractions kept getting harder and faster. I collapsed in Euston Station's toilet. An ambulance brought me here.
When are you due?
I don't know.
All right. Do you know when you conceived?
No. When I missed my periods, I'd cross off 4 days on the kitchen calendar every month, so my mother wouldn't know I'm pregnant. I've done that for 7 months.
Have you been under a doctor's care during those months?
No.
Shall we call your mother, then? Other family?
No.
Mary was stoic as her baby crowned. Her tissues were supple, and with the baby small, her vaginal opening was sufficient for the midwife and I to deliver the baby. Mary followed instructions, when to push down and when to pant. There was no need for an episiotomy, as the shoulders came out with a final push. It was a girl. I had delivered my first wonder. A healthy, vigorous 5-pound infant. Overcome with emotion, tears welled up in my eyes at the miracle. I wanted to dance about the room and pronounce to the world my achievement. The midwife saw my euphoria and smiled. She brought me down to earth by showing me how to clamp the cord and divide it, then how to massage the lower abdomen to help deliver the placenta. I watched her examine the baby while it shook its arms, eyes barely open, shocked at entering the cold world. After cleaning off the baby and placing silver nitrate drops into its eyes to protect against infection by syphilis, gonorrhea, or chlamydia, usually tested for during pregnancy, I inserted a small tube through her nose into her stomach to ensure the esophagus was clear. We swaddled the newborn and placed it into the incubator. Feeling in high spirits, I presented her daughter to Mary, placing the baby on her chest. I was startled when she displayed no emotions, not even a triumphant smile. She supported it with one hand, looking down at the stranger. I was assigned to fill out the birth certificate while the midwife cleaned up, and then left the room. "What's her name, Mary?" She shrugged. "How about Victoria?" Mary nodded. I wrote it down. "Hello, world. Meet Victoria O'Rourke." Perhaps I should have recommended Miracle for the name. "And what shall I put for the father's name?" UCH had probably as many social workers as midwives, perhaps because of the proximity of Euston Station, a terminal for the railway lines from the north and the Midlands. Concerned with Mary's apathy, I paged the social worker, who told me to sign the birth certificate and place it in the chart, that he would see Mary shortly when she came up to the psych ward. 2 aides moved Mary and baby Victoria, and that was the last I saw of them. Later that morning, Magdalena telephoned me.
It's me.
"Hello, me. Where are you now?"
I'm here, in London, visiting from Warsaw.
"You're here?"
Yes, my father was posted to Brussels. It feels so good to be abroad again.
"I'll bet."
Do you have time in your busy doctor life for dinner with an old friend?
"I'm on an OB rotation right now, delivering babies at all hours. I don't think I could join you unless you wanted to eat early in the hospital refectory."
That doesn't sound like a lovely dinner. How about a restaurant nearby?
"I'm sorry, I just can't get away. The registrar already ripped me a new one for daring to attend a lecture. I shudder to think what he would do if I left to eat."
All right. Maybe next time.
"Oh, I'd love to see you and catch up with your life. When will there be a next time?" It was wonderful to hear from an old flame, And to think that although close friends had been scattered to the various corners of the world by Middle East politics and war, an attempt was made to keep in touch, to recapture past pleasant moments, to give meaning to our past lives. However, I felt a pang of guilt, for I had never taken the opportunity to tell or write to her about Victoria, my profound new love, and how life had moved on and much water had passed under the bridge. After the excitement of delivering baby Victoria and receiving the call from Magdalena, I sought out a refreshing cup of tea in the nurse's room. I welcomed the stale biscuit. But then the bully and his Wellingtons came in.
Go to Bay 3 and sew up the episiotomy.
I've never done that. Could you show me?
It's simple. Use an ochromic. Start at the top of the wound, take full thickness bites, and approximate all the layers into one continuous running suture until you reach the edge of the introitus. I'm off to see Mr. Brunt.
I knew an episiotomy was an incision of the posterolateral vaginal wall and the perineum. A large heavy Mayo scissors is used to get a clean, straight cut, few inches away from the urethra and anus. This enlarges the vaginal opening, allowing the baby's head and the wide shoulders to pass easily through the birth canal without tearing the tissues. I went to Bay 3, where I came upon a woman lying with her feet in stirrups, holding a midwife's hand as she waited. I drew back the covering, saw a medium-sized cut, and examined it. The muscle of the vaginal wall formed a sandwich. One side was the vaginal mucosa, and on the other side was the skin, with its subcutaneous tissue in between. There was a modest amount of bleeding from the cut edges. Exploring the wound with my gloved fingers, I did not find any particular blood vessel, only oozing muscle. Based on my limited surgical experience, I decided to anesthetize the wound with local anesthesia, and then close each layer separately. Using a more delicate 2/0 chromic stitch with a smaller needle than the registrar dictated, I approximated the vaginal mucosa wall first, and then the skin with its subcutaneous layer, making sure the skin edges of the introitus met to re-establish the snugness of the vaginal opening and ensure a clean scar. I left a gap at the edge to allow residual oozing to escape. Finally, I took the larger O-chromic and placed some stitches through the mucosa muscle skin sandwich to approximate the muscle and stop further bleeding. My closure took longer than what the registrar had suggested, and when I was about finished and I was admiring my work, he walked in.
What are you doing? This is not plastic surgery. You're not doing it as I told you.
I just applied basic surgical principles of closing a wound in layers after anesthetizing it.
It's unnecessary and a waste of time. No one will see that incision. After birth and after an episiotomy, the nerves down there are numb, so anesthesia is unnecessary. Now go to Bay 7 and close the episiotomy the way I told you. Understand?
Wait! Wait! The patient may not see it, but she will feel it. She can feel it. I wouldn't want my balls sewed together without anesthesia, would you?
You're a cheeky bastard. Do as I tell you or I'll fail you. There's lots of work to be done. Now get on with it, you slacker.
I wanted to shout after him. Prick. You're a bloody contemptible prick. I controlled my temper. Rising, I looked at the patient. She was wide-eyed. Had she seen the smoke blowing out of my ears? I thanked the midwife, who had been supplying me with the local anesthesia, sutures, and had constantly adjusted the overhead light so I could work, and asked her if she minded cleaning up after me.
Don't worry, love. He is a difficult man. Even Professor Brandt didn't want him around to help with the C-section.
That would be the C-section on Mrs. Coleman. He had cheated me out of an operation and not even allowed me in the operating room to witness. By late evening of my first day, we entered a slack period. Usually those who are free would huddle in the corner of a nurse's room, cup of tea in hand, to discuss an interesting patient or field questions from the on-call students. Our registrar was not interested in teaching students and did not appear. While I was learning to birth babies, the Third Arab-Israeli conflict, the Six-Day War, revived passions between Jewish students with staunch Zionist leanings and Arab students entangled in the plight of the displaced Palestinians, leading to rowdy brawls in the university union. I remained out of the fray by choice, recognizing that the political problem was not as black and white as the press made out, and the solution was complicated and not within my sphere of influence. Some fellow Arab students who wanted me to demonstrate in support of the Palestinians accosted me and mocked my lack of patriotism. Equally, 2 fanatical Zionist fellow students in my class, among them the ones who had hurled toilet roll missiles at me a few years earlier, harassed me again. Making their index fingers into the shape of a gun and making the noise of a shot, they'd fire their imaginary bullets at me. I tried to ignore their hostile acts, but wished they'd made an effort to get to know my views, and not to assume I was a hostile Arab. Exhausted, I pushed these thoughts from my mind as I went up to my cubicle that night. I fell into a deep sleep, vividly recalling the day's events in convoluted dreams. A serene baby with Victoria's adult, seductively alluring face floated across my vision, alarmingly replaced by a huge blimp of a repulsive-looking, pallid, naked vulva with green eyes and sharp teeth advancing toward me, roaring like a Chinese dragon, ready to devour me. In fear, I struggled, holding it at bay with outstretched hands.
Hey, keep it down in there.
I awoke, disoriented in semi-darkness, my scrub shirt soaking with sweat. The neon strip light in the corridor shimmered through the frosted glass window set in the door. It was almost 11. I kicked off my shoes, took off my soiled scrubs, and fell back naked onto my bed. My body ached from the tension and toil of the day. Curled up, childlike, I hoped it would be a while before the midwives or registrar telephoned me for the next delivery. I sank into dream-free sleep. I became aware of a tall figure standing just inside the door, backlit by the corridor's glare.
It took forever to find you. Are you awake?
What? Who are you?
My dinner went on for so long. Are you awake?
Oh, Magdalena. I'm bushed. Unable to focus or rise from the bed, I wished she had not come. The outline of her coat, followed by her skirt, dropped into a heap onto the floor. She pulled her sweater over her head, shaking her long hair free, and snapped off her bra. Liberated, her breasts bounced, throwing shadows against the glass. They swung loose as she bent to strip off her pantyhose. Befuddled, all thoughts of guilt and apprehension about Victoria vanished. When I last saw her in Egypt 6 years ago, she was a teenage tomboy, smart, bright-eyed, full of energy and life with striking, beautiful features, and a charm brought out by her flirtations. Now, in the dim light, she appeared exotic, a breathtaking feminine transformation. As she came toward me, her womanly aroma flooded and saturated my nostrils. Her faint perfume, mixed with stale cigarette smoke, wafted by as she bent over me, murmuring,
Chcę cię.
I want you.
Kocham cię.
I love you. I was instantly responsive. Her warm body slipped under the blanket, luscious, inviting, and hospitable, engulfing me in whispers that comforted me, Murmurs I wanted to hear, feel, and had fantasized about since we were teenagers in Cairo. After a day living with pale, sterile, shaven lips, the whiff of her fragrance and tenderness of her flesh reassured me that obstetrics had not dulled or killed off my appreciation of a woman's body. Her hands expressed the urgency of her muttered needs, her thighs inviting and welcoming.
At last. Forever.
Afterward, we fell asleep, our legs entwined on the narrow bed, our intimacies having completely banished my ghoulish images of Mrs. Coleman. With our fusion, a profound confusion occurred in my mind. Did the thoughts and words expressed during states of half-consciousness, states of emotional vulnerability, reflect deep, hidden reality? Did Magdalena's at last mean an act long dreamt of but forestalled? And the forever, a subtext of a bond lasting beyond eternity? I cherished our friendship, but knew my soul belonged to Victoria. I jolted awake. Magdalena stirred and looked at me inquisitively through half-closed eyes. I answered, listened to the voice on the other end. I turned to Magdalena. I have to leave.
Must you?
I nodded, bending over and brushing her hair from her face to kiss her goodbye. It wasn't a farewell kiss, but more one of gratitude, that she had cared enough to track me down and satisfy a mutual, long-held fantasy.
Will you be long?
I don't know.
I'll stay a little longer in case you come back soon. Try to return to me. I have to go back to Brussels tomorrow. My parents are expecting me. Jestem pewna, że rozumiesz.
I smiled at her use of the phrase she had told me often in Egypt, when the fire of our romance was at its height. I do understand. I whisked out the door, focusing on the delivery ahead of me, leaving my passing comet in the celestial sky. In the next 8 weeks at University Hospital, I helped deliver 50 healthy babies with no complications. The sheer accomplishment of the happy moments and seeing the delight on most mothers' faces made me wonder if I should not become an obstetrician instead of a surgeon. I would still get to operate. The arc of an obstetrician seemed that early in their career, they did some cesarean sections, sewing up episiotomies of various lengths and complexities. Later in their career, they would do more gynecological-type operations, presumably on the same aging population. I wasn't sure which area of surgery interested me most, but I was certain which woman had my heart. Eventually, I saved up enough to purchase the antique diamond ring for Victoria.
From the many ways Mother repeatedly recounted my arrival to her friends, I got the impression that I fell into the latter category. But no matter. I was beginning to learn that not all women saw my presence as intrusive. As I had just experienced, some women even sought me out.
been listening to Making the Cut from 1C Productions. Making the Cut was written, produced, and directed by Rebecca Seitz, based on Michael McGeed's manuscript, Mastering the Knife. Noah James played Michael McGeed. Other roles were brought to life by the voice talent of Sharon Lynn, Kay Alluvian, Victoria Wickham, John Cuban, Mila Bridger, Sarah Griffin, and David Marcus. Audio engineering provided by Zisher LLC. Making the Cut theme music by Kyle J. Baker. Learn more at makingthecutpodcast.com.